Looks like Joshi isn't the only one who can deliver a mean Dvar Torah. And Joshi and Sarina, happy 6th anniversary today. Okay, Uncle Jeffrey's going to give this thing a shot. You guys are going to tell me if I have game or not. This is the Dvar Torah that I will be delivering on Saturday at my synagogue, Temple Bethel. It's Bethel Synagogue in East Windsor, New Jersey. And here we go. A gitten Shabbos allemen sitzen du in Schule rein und a Häusen Leben Teichland. Good Shabbos to everybody, whether you're sitting inside in shul or out there in Livestream land. Being comforted while smashing idols. Leo Roston's The Joy of Yiddish is more than just a dry dictionary. His humorous stories and homilies embellish the subject Yiddish words' literal translations. For example, let's visit his description of the word Magid, an itinerant preacher. He recounts that a well-credentialed Magid was driven from shtetl to shtetl to interactively preach to congregations, perhaps like yours or mine would have been once upon a time, in a different place and time. The enthusiastic Magid reveled in the exchanges of questions and ensuing answers from the flock. These repartees always fascinated his driver, whose admiration grew over those 20 years of his serving and observing the Maggid, till one day the driver said that he had listened to those sermons and exchanges and could recite them all in his sleep. Just once, he wanted the experience of being the Maggid. The amused Maggid agreed. So the next day, when they arrived in a new town to them, they devised to switch clothing and roles. After his well-received sermon, the driver flawlessly fielded all the congregants' questions except for one. A bright yeshiva bacher posed a profound, contemporary, yet nuanced original question, whose theme hadn't previously been broached over those previous 2 decades of his employ. All eyes focused on the raggedly dressed fellow upon this response. I'm amazed that someone should have the temerity to ask such a basic question. Why, even my bedraggled, unlearned driver who never set foot in a yeshiva could certainly answer that one. So I want to thank all of you and the rabbis for indulging my sense of humor, and to the rabbis, especially at this time, Brooks Brothers ain't got nothing on you. In these relatively contemporary times, usually the Haftarot are derived from a section of the Book of Prophets representing the Nun for Nevi'im in Tanakh, which refers specifically to that week's Torah portion. Things change, however, in those weeks between the fasting of the 17th of Tammuz and Rosh Hashanah. Though there are allusions to Isaiah's prophecy signifying a just and rightful society with Ra'eh's 6th Aliyah, the renowned sages certainly had other ideas. In his seminal work, Levush Malchut, the Ashkenormative codifier Mordechai Yoffi suggests that, in a national sense, the Haftarot of Consolation, or the Sheva de Nechemta, mirror the 7 days of personal Shiva. With some agreement from certain modern grief counselors, he notes that there's a 7-week process arising from the depths of Tisha B'Av's depression to Rosh Hashanah's glory under divine kingship. This 3rd week of Consolation's Haftarah begins with Isaiah's exclamation that God is so advised by the prophets that the afflicted, tempest-tossed Bnei Yisrael don't feel consoled to their liking by the Nevi'im. Last week's Haftarah began the actual implementation of Consolation's details following the effective burial and Kaddish for a way that was. Bnei Yisrael felt God has forsaken them, and with an eye to the future, want more direct comfort. That is, directly from the one above, not the Nevi'im. The grieving and recovery process will continue, but the Parsha reminds us that the Eibishter demands an exclusive relationship with his people. As such, idolatry in all its forms cannot be brooked. Today's public statue controversies may seem novel, yet it was only a bit more than half my lifetime ago when that wall was torn down following President Reagan's exhortation to Mr. Gorbachev. Social justice warriors of various stripes in such times may have been informed, directly or not, generally by Deuteronomy's chapter 12, more specifically its 3rd verse. Smashing idols is nothing new. As recently or long ago, depending on your viewpoint, in 1965, the Byrds sang, "There's a time to build up, a time to break down, and a time for every purpose under heaven." I know, yeah, Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, they're due some writing royalties. Most of us are at least somewhat familiar with Midrash on the ziggurats associated with the Tower of Babel, Avraham Avinu's employment at his father Terach's retail idol store, and with the Exodus's arch nemesis, the would-be God King, the Pharaoh. Just like God, who has been speaking with Moses, has no physical form, the warnings concerning idolatry that Moses continues to pound into the children of Israel, and by extension, us today as well, address dangers when they are conceptual, even when they are not simply corporeal. 2 years ago, I came across the Tikva podcast interview of Signature Bank's founder and president, Scott Shea, who is promoting his fascinating recent book, In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism. In it, he argues that idolatry is the default mode of humanity and essentially is the source of all evil. In a nutshell, he posits that idolatry is a set of lies about naked power. It ascribes supernatural power and authority to finite beings, ideologies, along with other natural processes, elements, and beings. Those run the gamut from stone-cold objects to hot-blooded demagogues. Bnei Yisrael, and us by extension, may have left Egypt centuries ago, but Moses' aim of taking the Egypt out of a Bnei Yisrael poised to enter the Promised Land continues to be an ongoing challenge. Shea explains that the Bible was revolutionary in being the first religious text not requiring mankind to believe in lies. And so, check our logic at the door. Judaism's monotheism requires us to think and take responsibility for ourselves and have responsibility with the texts themselves. In its various forms, however, idolatry has continued to vex us, even in our individual lifetimes, even today, even to this day. Vox's David Roberts recently, not unwittingly, spoke about this. It would be an interesting fundraiser to cast lots on whom most would pick to associate his comment on a current Why Is This Happening podcast. Quote, "First, you train people not to trust their own eyes and ears, to just trust the leader as the source of information, and then proceed to the atrocities. Once you've got people who will believe anything you say and support you in literally anything you do, then you're off to the races. But first, you've got to condition them." Where do we go from here? Certainly not Baal Peor. It's quite a rich topic. The discussions can venture off multiple ways. Certainly, the ills of idolatry are a subset of the curse Moses sets upon us, opening this week's Parsha. The Kindlech, personifying the hope for the future, continue to be our collective blessing. If the Haftarah's third verse seems somewhat familiar, it's a great lead-in for B'nai Mitzvah to be invested in Israel bonds. When read in parallel with the Talmud's tractate Brachot, Daf 64a, the sages interpreted this verse homiletically. Do not read it as your children, Banaich, but read it as your builders, Bonaich. Torah scholars are those who build peace for their generation. As it is stated in the Psalms, those who love your Torah have great peace. There is no stumbling block for them. And may there be peace within your walls, prosperity within your palaces. Rubies and sapphires alike, for our good, it's time to gather stones together. The children may or may not need singing lessons like I do. They will certainly have to use their brain power to build virtually in the coming years. But as Moses will continue to harp upon Bnei Yisrael and us as the adults in the room, we've all got to set the example of continued vigilance against all forms of idolatry. Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so I got that down to pretty close to, I could take the joke. I'm going to leave the joke in. It's going to be about 11 and a half minutes. I think that'll be cool. And I'm going to be as cool a cucumber as I can be on this. I appreciate all of you guys, if not your fan mail, if you're whole throwing off the tomatoes. I am grateful this opportunity to strut my stuff a little bit. Happy birthdays to everybody that's out there. I know Ahuva's got one. I know Joshy's got one. I know that Daniel's got one. And if I'm missing somebody, and I know that I mentioned the anniversary today too. I want to dedicate this, I should have said this really to start, but it's a little teaser. I want to dedicate this to my daughter Emily and my son-in-law Gabriel, who will be gracing my parents with another great-grandchild pretty soon. Shabbat Shalom.